Hey guys, David here and welcome to this video. Behind me you can see three different printers that cost just about the same. They are all around the $200 price point, which is a really interesting price point for entry-level 3D printers. Just a few years ago it would have been unthinkable to get a decent printer for $200. But now all these printers print perfectly fine prints that are usable for everyday life, or you could even start a business with any one of these printers. But there still are quite a few differences between them, and that's what I'm gonna explore in this video. So before I get further into the video, I want to do a bit of full disclosure. I did not buy these printers myself. The Ender 3 here was sent to me originally by Banggood. The Alfawise U30 here was sent to me by GearBest, and the JGAurora Magic was sent to me by Banggood as well. I'm gonna have links to all of them down below, but no matter who sent them to me, that's not gonna influence my opinion on them at all. I also want to give a quick update since I just recently reviewed the U30 and the JGAurora, and I got some little things wrong, and that in the newest Cura version, that is the 4.1 version, there are actually printer profiles for both of these printers, so you don't have to go off the Ender 3, and I actually did see a little bit of a print improvement using these profiles. I also figured out what caused the weird extrusion issues that I had on the JGAurora Magic, and that was that the default extrusion plastic piece had a crack in it, which caused the idler wheel that pushes against the filament while being extruded to not always push quite as tight. It was really hidden, so it took me quite a long time to figure that out, but after replacing that part, which is super cheap, I luckily had a part laying around, but if that happens to you, you can also just contact the manufacturer and they're gonna send you a new part. And after that, I didn't have any more weird extrusion problems with it. So the oldest one of them is the Ender 3. It's the one that kinda started this $200 printer war, and as soon as all the other manufacturers saw how well the Ender 3 sold, they jumped on the bandwagon and created their own very similar printers. That they all three have pretty much the same build volume at 220 by 220 by like 230 to 250, which is decently sized while still having the printer small enough that it can fit in many places. That is compared to something like the CR10, which is also rather entry level, which is a lot bigger in the footprint. You can also print bigger, but you don't really need more than this in print size. And to make the basically clones of the Ender 3 a bit more appealing, they also added some extra little features that have become more readily accessible, like filament runout sensors, power recover, or a touchscreen in case of the U30 here. But are these features worth it over the Ender 3, and what is the print quality? So let's start off first with kind of a general overview of these printers. They are shipped to you basically the same way. They are already somewhat pre-assembled but flat packed to save on shipping costs, so you're gonna have to assemble them, but they all won't take much more than an hour to assemble, so it's not that big of a deal at all. They also all include English instructions. When I got the Ender 3, they were not all that great, but I'm sure by now they have improved a lot, and you can find tutorials for them on YouTube as well, so if you need some more assistance, then that's perfectly fine. The build quality on these three printers is largely very similar. They all rely on the 4020 aluminum extrusion. The Ender 3 and the U30, they have it on basically all the different axes and use Delrin roller bearings on them to create the linear guides, while the JGAurora, it is using 8mm steel rods for the y-axis, which is also perfectly fine. And it also has a little bit more substantial metal base that is actually really nice, as it encloses all the electronics and everything nicely into a very solid base that creates some heft to the printer and just kind of gives a bit of an appearance of quality. While the Ender 3 and the U30, they have more open approach with the power supply more exposed and the electronics just a little bit covered up by a plastic piece, but not all that protected. So in terms of build quality, I would probably say that the JGAurora takes the win in this round, but the other aren't that far behind. And while we're talking about just the kind of physical appearance and the usability, let's talk about the user interface. And on the Ender 3 and the JGAurora, they have this basically very standard basic LCD with some lines of text on it and a rotary encoder wheel that you can push in to select all of them. It works, it gets the job done, but it is not very intuitive, especially moving around all the axes. It takes quite a few clicks and is rather annoying. The Alfawise U30, however, has this little resistive touchscreen that you can use to control all the axes, and while the screen is not all that good, resistive touch is not very nice to use. It still is miles and miles ahead of the other two in terms of user interface. You just go into the move menu with one single press and then you have all the axes that you can move around in a single screen. It's so much easier, and like changing anything on the U30 is just 2 or 3 taps or clicks away, while on the two with the just rotary encoder wheel it's just really annoying. You have to go through many sub-menus to get to whatever you need. So in terms of user interface, the U30 takes the win very easily. The hot end and extruder on these machines is basically the same on all of them. They all rely on a Bowden extruder with simple teethed gear on the extruder in the back. It works. I didn't have many problems apart from the tracking on the JGAurora, as I said. And the extruders, they are very similar on all of them. They are PTFE lines, so you can't go crazy high temperatures. Like 250 C is basically the max that you're gonna get on these extruders. The heated beds are a little bit of a different story, and I was actually surprised how different they were. From the outside they look very similar, but they have some different limitations and things that are going on. On the Ender 3 it's a rather thick aluminum base with a thin, like build tag-like surface clamped onto it, which works really well, and the bed gets up to temperature quite quickly. After 5 minutes it's around 95 degrees Celsius, and after like 10-15 minutes it gets all the way up to 225 degrees Celsius, which is really nice and hot, so you can actually print some more difficult materials and not just PLA. On the JGAurora, the print bed gets hot extremely quickly as well. After just 4 minutes it was at around 100 degrees, and after 5 minutes at 110 degrees, which is the limit on that bed. The software won't allow it to go any hotter. Although the heater definitely has power to go hotter, but it's just kind of a safety guard. But 110 degrees is still acceptable. On the Alfawise U30 I was a little bit disappointed in the bed, because it takes a lot longer to heat up. It took around 7 minutes to reach the 100 degrees mark, and 100 degrees is the maximum on it. And the reason why it takes longer to heat up is because in addition to the aluminum sheet, it also has a glass sheet on top, which is going to create a nicely uniform heat. If you have watched Thomas Salander's investigations into printer heatbed uniformity, then in that regard it's going to be really nice. But what you also have to keep in mind that 100 degrees is what the sensor reads, but the sensor is on the bottom of the aluminum sheet. So on the top of the glass sheet it's actually going to be even colder than the 100 degrees that it claims. So I wouldn't recommend the Alfawise U30 if you want to print materials that need a very hot bed, as it just doesn't reach as high as the other two. In terms of features, I already kind of mentioned that the Ender 3, it just has, it's very basic, it can print, but it doesn't really have any smart features. While both the U30 and the JGAurora, they have filament runout sensors and power recover functionality, which are both kind of not features that you need all the time, but it's really nice to have. Like, I wouldn't use a spool of filament where I think I have enough, but I'm not quite sure, because on the Ender 3 it'll just run out and maybe the last just couple millimeters of the print won't print properly and I wasted all that material. While on the other two printers I can just use that material, and if it actually runs out, then it'll just pause there and I can insert some new filament and I'm perfectly fine. The JGAurora also advertises that you can remove the SD card during the print and insert it and continue printing, which is not something that's usually gonna happen. I mean, there's no real reason why the SD card will pop out during the print, but I guess if you accidentally like unplug it or something, it's nice to have, I suppose. All three of them, however, don't have anything like automatic bed leveling. They all rely on just knobs in all four corners where you have to manually level the bed, which is not that big of a deal. You just do that and it's going to be fine for many prints, and if you notice that the first layer isn't quite even, you can adjust it a little bit on the fly, but it's not really a big deal in my opinion. In terms of noise, all three of these printers are pretty bad. None of them are especially quiet. They all use just standard stepper drivers that make a lot of noise. They all use annoyingly loud fans to cool the hot end, and for the power cooling valve, also in the power supply there are quite loud fans. So if you want to have these printers in a quiet environment like a living room or something, you're gonna have to do some heavy modifications on all three of them, as across the board they are just annoyingly loud. If you have them in the garage or something though, it's probably fine and you won't notice it too much. Before we get into print quality, which is probably what you're waiting for, I quickly want to mention software support, which is not something that you initially think about, but the Ender 3, because it has been around longer and because there are just so many people with Ender 3s out there, it's very easy to troubleshoot anything with it. There are basically very good profiles for all the slices softwares that you could imagine for it, and if ever anything goes wrong, there are probably already 20 people online that have had the same issue that you can very quickly Google. The U30 and the JGAurora, they now also have Cura profiles, which is really nice, but they are a lot less common, so it's going to be a little bit harder to find troubleshooting steps and other things if something goes wrong with them. But that's not a big deal, it's just something to keep in mind. So now let's get to that elephant in the room, the print quality. And first of all, I want to quickly mention that all three of them print really nice prints. And what I'm going to mention, it might sound a little bit extreme, but they're all just minute differences and any of them is going to serve you fine. But there are some differences that I do want to point out. In terms of dimensional accuracy, and what I'm using to test these is this test print here that has overhang tests, it has dimensional tests, it has bridging, it has fine details, a whole bunch. I'm going to show you some close-ups here. And for the dimensional accuracy, all three of them are very much in an acceptable range, but I did have slightly better results on the JGAurora, which might be due to just having a more solid base that kind of takes out a little bit of vibrations or whatever, can cause some more dimensional inaccuracies. But the differences are very minute. The bridging performance on all three of them is pretty good. I can't see any real differences here, and that's a setting that mostly depends on how hard you're printing and how well the fan is adjusted. And since I matched all the settings across all three printers, that's not something that is a big difference. What you can notice a difference though is in stringing, and in that department I did do a lot of testing. Like I have three of these test prints here, and there you can see a bunch more in the background, and it got kind of annoying. I just really didn't want to have all that stringing in there, as I knew that I could somehow tune the settings, and I was able to, by using the proper printer profiles for these and adjusting some settings, I got them to reduce the stringing a little bit. But the Ender 3 is just still out of the box. I didn't have any problems with stringing. On very difficult prints with a lot of retracts, there might be some little fuzzies, but they can easily be removed with just some hot air. But on the JGAurora and the U30, there is some stringing and some like blobbing. So that's just, it's not that big of a deal. You can remove it easily with some side cutters or with some heat, but it just is there, and it's an extra step in the post-processing where you do have to clean them up a little bit more than something like the Ender 3. In terms of overhang performance, they are very similar. That's also something you can tune in your settings a little bit, but once again on the Ender 3 I just got a little bit more precision at steep overhangs that are like 60-65 degrees overhangs, which is on all three of them about the limit. So in your slicer settings I would probably set the overhang limit to something like 55 on all of them. On the Ender 3, if you want, you can probably get away with 60 degrees as the maximum angle where you don't need any support material. After that they pretty much all fall apart and you do need support material. Ringing is something that is not really noticeable on any of these three printers, and what ringing is, if you don't know, is that when the printer goes around the corner, it doesn't usually perfectly make a 90-degree angle, but it just slightly overshoots the target and then kind of bounces back and forth. And on some printers like the ZR10, which has a really big, heavy piece that it has to move around for the y-axis, that is a lot more noticeable. But on these printers, it's not really noticeable at all. But if I had to pick a winner, it'd probably be the JGAurora, which is most likely due to it having a much heavier solid base that just absorbs more of these vibrations. But all of them are perfectly usable, so the vertical text on these is very sharp and nicely legible on all of them. In terms of quality of the top surface, which is an indication of the extrusion quality, the Ender 3 is pretty much perfect out of the box, while both of the other ones, they do need some tweaking. On the U30 I found that I needed to set the flow rate at 102% to get a nice even top layer, and on the JGAurora I actually had to bump it up all the way to 105%, otherwise I would get some little signs of under extrusion. That is something that might be different on your version of these printers, so you just want to take a look at the top surface of your print, and what you want is no raised edges but also no clearly visible lines with like a gap in between. So if you have a gap in between your lines on the top of your print, you do want to increase the flow rate a little bit so that it is a perfectly flat and nice top surface. The text on the top surface is on all three of them not all that legible. That's one just shortcoming of the Bowden setup, where you can't have that fine control over the extrusion since it's just a longer piece that has to be pulled back and forth and everything. You can read some of the larger text, and that is a little bit easier for the printer to print, but the smaller stuff is not really all that legible on any of the three printers. There's not that big of a difference there at all. In terms of Z inaccuracies, which is what you can see if you look at the vertical parts of your print, if you have any lines there, that's probably because you have some inaccuracies in your Z motion. And the U30 here, it was basically perfect. None of the prints I could see any inaccuracies in Z, so the sides are all perfectly smooth. On the Ender 3, every once in a while there was a little bit of a line visible, not bad at all. And the same thing on the JGAurora. So that's it in terms of print quality. As I said, they are all very similar, but the Ender 3, in my experience on the printers that I got here, is just a little bit better. It doesn't have the stringing problems, and otherwise it's just like, it's very minor, but I just get the most reliable print quality out of my Ender 3. That might be different on other printers of the same model, but maybe it's also something in the manufacturer. I can't really tell since I only have a sample size of one of all of these printers. But that's just something that you can keep in mind in your decision. So coming back to basically the question I asked in the beginning of this video, or that at least you guys are probably asking yourself, which one of these three should you get? And I'm sorry, but there's no clear answer. All of them have certain strengths and other weaknesses. They're very similar, and one thing that you of course have to do is check the prices. All of them are constantly on sale, but the sales vary. So I've seen them as low as like $170, but also sometimes they go up to like $220 or even higher. So make sure you check the sales, you check some different websites. But what I can say that if you don't really care about extra bonus features, but you just want print quality and maybe a little bit easier way to get it fixed because there's more community support, then you can go with the Ender 3. If you really like the touchscreen, then go with the Alfawise U30. It also prints nicely, and if the solid base with all enclosed electronics is appealing to you, you can go with the JGAurora. As for me, my favorite out of them is, for the user interface, definitely the U30. I just detest the clicky wheel user interfaces since I've used the touchscreen. So that's a big plus for me. And the Ender 3 is basically my go-to machine for printing PDG, and that's what's on here. And the spool that I've basically had on here for a long time. I use all of my other printers for PLA mostly, but I just have the PDG installed on the Ender 3 and it prints beautifully every time. The hot heater pad is great and the print results are good, but the other printers could probably also do that. It's just what I've kind of gotten used to doing. So I hope that this helped you out and kind of made the decision a little bit easier which printer to get. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like down below. You can also check out all the individual reviews of these linked down below. Make sure to also check out my social media, linked down below for all kind of updates and behind the scenes looks. You can also check out the links to these printers down below and many more things. So make sure you check the description. So thanks for watching and until next time.